Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us tonight on this 15th of November. Thanks for joining us. And as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information easily at weather.gov/Alaska or on your mobile device or tablet, mobile.weather.gov. Simply type in your location or zip code at the top, hit go, and then send that page that you get to your home screen on your phone or tablet. It acts just like a website and uses a lot less internet or bandwidth, and should get your page to you a lot quicker and faster in the way that you need to see it. 1-800-472-0391 is the easy way to find your Alaska weather information on the telephone. It's a free call for you anywhere in Alaska. And if you can't find what you're looking for, whether it's your local forecast, information about the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center's suite of information, or a forecast from the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, even tsunami.gov, I'm happy to help anytime you like. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me online. And speaking of hydrology, yesterday we were talking about some concerns around the Ketchikan Creek and the dam. The good news is that little dot is green, and if you're looking at the map of the hydrographs around Alaska from weather.gov/APRFC, which is short for the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, a green dot is a good dot, and that means that there is no water level right now that is in action stage or flood stage. This is in the green zone, which is the okay zone. It is running a little bit on the high side, but it is not in action or flood stage right now, which is really, really good news compared to what we saw this time yesterday, because here is Ketchikan, and if there is flooding, it's all going to go to all of our friends in Ketchikan. So here's the hydrograph as of this afternoon. And you can see that yesterday that hydrograph was really getting close to the record level at about 350 feet in elevation. It peaked around 349.24 feet. So got pretty high up there. It is now going back down and looks to be either at or just below action stage now, which is about 348 feet. So what that means is that the potential for flooding is getting better. Now there's still going to be some rain in the area. There may still be some heavier rain in the area, but the heaviest of rain and the highest amount of the surge seems to be going down at this point. So that's the good news there. For the very latest information, make sure you have a way to get weather alerts. If you're in Ketchikan, this should always be something that you're paying attention to, because it's not uncommon to get heavy rain through the Ketchikan area, of course, as you well know. And with that, that would be certainly something to keep aware of as you go through your rainier periods there. Where is the elevation at the Ketchikan Creek or Ketchikan Lakes Dam? So you can find that easily on our website, and it's something that I would bookmark on my home computer there or on my phone if you are concerned about that for sure. Now, as we look out across the north and the west, we are watching wind from the upper Kobuk or lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys all the way down to the lower Koyukuk and the lower Yukon. Wind gusts are still going to be a problem, at least through midnight tonight. It looks like the wind will stay up with us through probably gusts to about 45 miles per hour. So all this blowing off from the north and the east. We've been watching this wind fairly strong throughout a good chunk of the week because of high pressure in the north and low pressure down in the south. That conveyor belt of air is really getting the squeeze right here across some of our western sections of the interior and the lower Yukon. So it will stay windy probably through the rest of tonight, but the strongest winds will likely start to diminish as we get past the midnight hour tonight. So wind advisories are still in effect for the lower Yukon, the Koyukuk, and the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys around Ambler. As you look down to the south and west, we have a winter weather advisory now in effect for southwestern Alaska around Bristol Bay. And this is really for areas for generally around the Dillingham region and our southwestern capes. Last night we were talking about potential for some snow around Togiak and areas from about, looks like Clark Point to Good News Bay. That area shifted a little bit to the south and west as it all developed. That focus for snow moved just a little bit from where we thought it would be. That happens. Snow is tricky, tricky stuff to forecast, especially in Alaska. And now it looks like that focus for snow is going to be around the Dillingham area. So don't be surprised to get about 3 to 5 inches of snow in that area. But to the north side of that, we're also getting reports of rain in Lake Iliamna and around Port Allsworth. And with temperatures holding below that freezing point, about 30 degrees or so this afternoon, and rain moving in, that means it's freezing rain, freezing on contact. And chances are you're going to see some pretty slick conditions there around Lake Iliamna and the inland areas of our Bristol Bay communities. So be careful out there. Of course, that means aviation concerns are certainly going to be with you as well. And isolated severe icing certainly possible for the rest of the evening and overnight hours if that trend continues, and it looks like it will for a little while there. So be careful out around southwestern Alaska with a winter weather advisory till 1 o'clock on Saturday morning. So again, overnight and into the early morning hours. Here is the weather situation this afternoon. Low pressure is sitting right about at Sand Point. And as this is slinging in moisture from the west and northern parts of the Gulf, it is running into a lot of cold air. And as that is just kind of working its way over the Alaska range, pulling in colder air here from the north and creating that band of snow, which is really narrow in its focus, but has enough warm and wet air falling into that too that it's creating the rain around Lake Iliamna. Out across southeast, still getting some reports of rain there up and down southeastern Alaska with another wedge of low pressure here sitting across the central and western Gulf, and all of this working with high pressure up across the north to bring in a decent helping of cold winter air across the interior and snow. Snow piled up around places like Tok today, and the last 24 hours or so, a little bit more than about 10 to 11 inches out there. And many other locations saw about 4 to 6, even 7 inches of snow across the central and eastern interior. So there is snow, and it's just not in south central or southwestern Alaska at this point. Out across the west, you can see areas of clouds here working their way in from south to southeast and working their way west. That is the next weather maker that's trying to creep its way in. And you can also detect a lot of those clouds just zipping right along the Yukon Valley, pushing out to sea. That strong easterly flow will continue as we go through tonight, but it does look like it will diminish a little bit as we get into the afternoon tomorrow there. So not as gusty, not as windy across the western interior as we go through tonight and tomorrow. Notice too, this big bright section of cloud cover that's working from the south and southwest, that continues to track northward. It does have a lot of moisture with it. It does look like it will produce some more rainfall across southeast as we get through tonight and tomorrow. In the meantime, it is still snowing around the Copper River Valley. It looks like we have freezing rain around Lake Iliamna, and that, again, that stripe of snow right there around the southwestern Capes to Dillingham with the winter weather advisory now. Low pressure is down to 983 millibars, 977 for the low that's working through the Kenai Fjords, and a trough of low pressure working its way into southeastern Alaska, again helping to keep that rainfall going through tonight and tomorrow. Snow is primarily going to focus on the southern third of mainland Alaska there. A boundary will kind of wobble its way across into the southern Yukon and western and northern parts of British Columbia. That second surge of moisture is rising north to meet it. As that works its way in towards southeast, we'll probably see a better chance of rain tonight and tomorrow. Out across southwest, snow will continue to fly there. It really looks like that focus is probably going to sit right on top of the southwestern Capes themselves tonight and tomorrow, and all along the chain. Unsettled weather there will bring pockets of rainfall through Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky, Adak, and Atka. As we get into Saturday, that high pressure core is moving off into the Northwest Territories. So 1,019 millibars. It is cold stuff, and it is really going to squeeze that air through the Yukon Valley as we get through Saturday and into Sunday. Low pressure sitting in pretty much the same old spot around southwest. We'll keep conditions low. There will be pockets of IFR and areas of freezing rain and snow with that. But a lot of that snow probably lingers across the north and western side of the Alaska range. Now, outside of Prince William Sound, a 987 millibar low there will work with another core of low pressure here across the eastern Gulf at 982 millibars. This is really the one that's got everything stirred up. It's got all the moisture with it, so the rain and the unsettled weather will move through. It does look like we're going to see some pretty choppy conditions, gales off the outer coast as we go through tonight and tomorrow. And as that swings through, expect the winds to come up probably with some gusts to around 40 miles per hour through the inside passage as we get through your Saturday, on top of low conditions as that moves through. So watch for that. Out across the west, heavy freezing spray looks to be an issue all the way through Saturday and Sunday. And you can see why. A lot of cold air is just working its way off. The wind should subside, though, as we get into Sunday for many West Coast communities. There's a fog and probably some light snow for the Chukchi Coast into the Bering Strait. Areas of fog working their way in from the northern parts of the Yukon as well, with that high pressure system very close to home. And then there's this. As we get into Sunday, a 958 millibar low works its way in quickly from south to north into the chain, and all of a sudden gales and maybe even storm force winds become a possibility as we get into the end of the weekend with that front working through. Low pressure is still working its way across the northern Gulf. This is part of that system that's been sliding across slowly from southwest. We'll still see rain across southeast, low conditions across the northern Gulf, maybe some breaks across the Cook Inlet region, but as we get through the end of the weekend and early next week, it starts to look like there might be a better chance for some light snow around south central, including Anchorage, the Matanuska and Susitna valleys again, and points east. So something to watch. As we get through the temperatures into tomorrow morning, lower 40s, fairly mild compared to the rest of the state and southeast. 38 around Cordova, 29 for Talkeetna, 20s and 30s down Cook Inlet to Kodiak at 32, 20s for most of Bristol Bay. As you get north of Bethel, temperatures really fall off into the single digits. There 9 in Bethel, 5 for Grayling, 2 below in Galena, and 12 below for Ambler. It looks like AKwx Pass anywhere from 12 to 24 below all the way out to Arctic Village. Utqiagvik looking at 11, 1 below in Kaktovik, and temps in the teens and 20s for most of the Kotzebue Sound region. High temperatures for your Saturday, 40s and 50s in southeast, but that will be a gloomy, wet, and dark 40s and 50s. So 52 in Sitka, for example, will be mild but damp. Prince William Sound temperatures in the 40s, 30s for South Central, down to Homer 39, and Fairbanks looking at 9 above.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR concerns will linger across some of the higher terrain of southeast all the way around into Prince William Sound and the Kenai Mountains there just outside of Seward and Whittier, all the way around to Cordova and Valdez. Now across the Alaska Range, we'll still be looking at IFR, especially across the south-facing slopes of the Alaska Range into parts of the higher terrain of southwest and the Bering Sea coast, south and west of Pilot Point and Port Hayden. Now across the Pacific coastline out across the western chain, IFR concerns there, and then widespread MVFR really to fill in just about everywhere else south of the Yukon Valley. You can see once you get to the Yukon and north to the Brooks Range, things are VFR in the morning. Hit and miss IFR around Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass to start your day with marginal conditions for all of the North Slope and the Chukchi and the Beaufort Seacoast as we go. Now, as we get into the afternoon, watching for IFR to spread out a little bit more out across the Chukchi Coast to about Point Barrow and north. Looking for Prince William Sound to the Kenai Mountains, Portage, all the way into the northern parts of Cook Inlet, including Turnagain and Knik Arm, and into the Susitna and Matanuska Valleys, looking like IFR. IFR also lurking just outside of Cross Sound and across the outer coast to Port Alexander and south to the Dixon entrance, and the high terrain all the way up into the Chilkoot and White Pass region. Marginal concerns don't move across the southern Bering Sea, across the central and eastern chain, all the way across southwest to the middle Tanana Valley, pushing up toward the upper Yukon Valley now, not past it though. Still looking good from the south end of the Brooks Range to the eastern side, all the way up toward Kaktovik, in fact, by the afternoon. And that trend should continue as we get into Sunday morning, looking for most of the Brooks Range to be okay, all the way out toward Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and the Yukon Delta. But south of that, it looks like marginal conditions, if not IFR conditions, will be found for Sunday morning through the Susitna and the Matanuska Valley into the Anchorage region and Portage Pass. But south of that, from Kenai, Soldotna, all the way to Homer and Seward, looks to be MVFR if you can get through it. IFR conditions across the eastern Gulf into the outer coast and across the higher terrain of southeast, and hit and miss around places like Eagle and perhaps down to Northway. Out west, a little bit of a break in the marginal conditions for the morning. You can see that kind of clearing up even more into the afternoon on Sunday with IFR across the central and eastern chain, across the higher terrain of southeast, and a little bit lingering around, let's say, Windy and Isabel Pass and across south central, looking at marginal conditions still over Anchorage and a large part of the Cook Inlet region down toward about Kodiak, but again, there will be some breaks all the way around the region, including the central, western, and northeastern parts of the interior. Here's a look at your past conditions in detail. Now, we start out with IFR and Anaktuvik, but it does look like things get better as we go into Saturday afternoon and again on Sunday. The same should be said for Adigan Pass. IFR in the morning, but certainly some major improvement through the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, though, we look to see IFR to start the day and then marginal conditions as we go. Rainy Pass right now looks to be locked in at IFR all day long tomorrow. Windy Pass should see some improvement as we get into the afternoon. Isabel Pass also looking for a marginal finish by the end of your Saturday after an IFR start. Marginal conditions most of the day from Antesta Pass. Tanita Pass looking to lean over toward IFR as we go throughout your Saturday. Portage Pass probably locked in, some improvements noted for Sunday, and Chilkoot and White Pass looking to be IFR most of your Saturday. Again, maybe some improvements as we get into the end of the weekend. Freezing levels right now show that warmer air is slowly building out here across the west, but only at low levels. You can see the surface freezing line nudging up toward St. Lawrence Island, down toward Bristol Bay, and then north of Kodiak Island, right over Cook Inlet, and all the way down through southeast, kind of jogging into British Columbia, close to Juneau. Now, as you get into the upper levels, 2, 4, and 6,000 foot levels of freezing are showing up across the eastern Gulf and southeast, but certainly significantly further south, south of Kodiak Island and the Shumagon Islands at this point. Icing potential is changing and thinning out just a little bit over what we've seen most of this week. Still have some hot spots, some opportunities for some considerable moderate across the eastern interior, across parts of south central into the Alaska range, and still lingering across southeast. So the levels we see here are considerably higher, above 8,000 to 10,000 feet. Across the interior and north, much lower levels of opportunity, above 3,000 feet or so across southwest, south central, and the eastern interior, and below 8,000 feet for isolated moderate across the north slope. The jet stream right now has a wave of low pressure across the western Gulf and across the western Bering and the Kamchatka Peninsula. A strong southwesterly flow working over the region with high pressure to our west, blowing in much colder air into the Bering Strait region. Southwesterlies over southeast, 20 to 40 knots there. Southerlies coming into the Gulf, and northeasterlies riding over the Brooks Range, 20 to 40 miles or 40 knots or so. Again, bringing in a lot of that cold. You can still see some stronger winds across the Brooks Range, 30 to 50 knots there, so we will be watching for turbulence to continue. Several other waves of low pressure across southwest and southeast at this point. So turbulence focus, hit and miss across southeast below 4,000 feet, but also that ribbon of isolated severe across the Brooks Range.
The Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge is a refuge in Alaska. It's the third largest refuge in the National Wildlife Refuge system. North of Fairbanks, it's a vast ecosystem of wetlands. What drives this refuge are natural forces of fire, ice, and water.
The Yukon Flats has got a really interesting history. Back in the late 50s, early 1960s, there was a proposal to dam the Yukon River down by Rampart, which is downstream of the Yukon Flats. And it was a hydroelectric proposal. And so in order to assess the merits of that proposal, people got together because they were a little bit concerned about what the impacts might be on the Yukon Flats, the habitat, and all the people living within the Yukon Flats Refuge. There's quite a few people living within the refuge. We have 7 villages. So in order to figure out how special the Yukon Flats was, the Fish and Wildlife Service banded over 40,000 ducks within the Yukon Flats. And using the band return information, they found out that those ducks were using 45 of the 50 lower 48 states. They were using 7 foreign countries, and they were using most of the provinces over in Canada, as well as all the major flyways down in the lower 48. And so that identified that the Yukon Flats was a special breeding area, and that information, along with a lot of other public information that was gathered during that whole process, really ensured that the dam never did go in, and thus the habitat was preserved.
So what that did is it really highlighted the national importance of this area and how important conserving this particular area is for conserving many other natural areas in the lower 48 and even across the continent.
To protect the Yukon Flats Refuge because we have responsibility towards our future generations to leave land protected in the state that it is now. The Yukon Flats is a wild place. The ecosystem is intact and functioning, and you can't find that very many places in the rest of the U.S.
The Yukon Flats Refuge is among the most important places for ducks. So each spring, millions of ducks, and in addition to shorebirds and geese, raptors and loons, they all fly to the refuge to nest and rear their young. And the reason they are attracted to this area is because it has really enriched wetlands. There are lots of nutrients in the wetlands that provide a lot of food for the growing young.
We also have a lot of predator, prey species like bears and black bears, grizzly bears, wolves. We also have a lot of moose and fur bearers that use the refuge. So overall, there's just a great diversity of both upland, lowland, and migratory bird species that use the refuge.
Most people know the flats as a duck nursery, and that was one of the main purposes that was designed for, but a lot of recent research over the last decade has really illustrated how important it is to a variety of native endemic fish species for subsistence and recreational and commercial fisheries throughout the entire Yukon River Basin and out to supporting commercial fisheries out to the Bering Sea as well. So it supports a variety of different whitefish and salmon species, the northern pike, a little bit of everything that people rely on as cultural identities, but also for subsistence resources and where people go to recreate and enjoy being outside.
The type of recreation that you're going to find on Yukon Flats Refuge is very primitive. And what that often does is it gives people a complete break from some of the stresses of today's world. There are no cell phone towers out there. There are no roads. There are no trails. So any type of recreation that people have is entirely natural. The lands and waters within the Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge are open to the public to enjoy. And that's a really important tenet upon which the United States is built.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice update. The Beaufort continues to fill in. We still have a wide area of marginal ice that extends from just northeast of Utqiagvik and well to your north. But what we're seeing here is a lot of this filling in fairly quickly, and probably in the next several days or so, this will be pack ice and drifting southward. We expect the leading edge of the ice to move south about 20 miles over the next 4 to 5 days or so. We'll continue to see new ice growing across the upper end of Kotzebue Sound and likely in parts of Norton Sound as well, with marginal ice continuing to fill in just a little bit more as the winds slow down across the west coast of Alaska. For the very latest information, you can check weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, and our sea ice experts tell us that in about the next 2 weeks, it'd be fairly common to see some new ice on the northern end of Cook Inlet around the Knik Arm. Saturday's marine forecast in southeast, we are going to have some wind moving through the inside passage, 25 to 35 knots, looking for gusts of 40 around Stevens Passage, and steady winds from about 30 to 35 knots across the outer coast. You're looking at about 14 to 15 foot seas. Northerlies light inland canal, though, 15 knots and 3 foot seas there on Saturday, becoming southerly on Sunday. 4 foot seas and 20 knots with gusts to 35 continuing around Stevens Passage and up toward Juneau. South and southeasterly winds through Clarence Strait, 25 knots and 7 foot seas. And notice the winds flipped, more of an onshore flow across the outer coast, 25 to 30 knots there with seas up to 16 to 17 feet south of Sitka and around Port Alexander. As we get into south central and Prince William Sound, a south and easterly flow coming into the sound, 15 knots and 2 foot seas there, 8 foot seas on the outside. Northeasterlies at 15 knots in the northern Cook Inlet, southerlies on the southern end there outside of Kashamag Bay, 20 knots and 5 foot seas. And east of the Barrens, 20 knots and 9 foot seas there up through the Kenai Fjords and Resurrection Bay, 15 knots and 8 foot seas on Saturday. Becoming more westerly as we go through your Sunday. Northerlies inside of Prince William Sound, southwesterlies blowing into the northern Gulf at around 20 knots with a 10 foot sea. And looks like seas inside of Cook Inlet running around 2 to 5 feet on Sunday. Around Bristol Bay, westerlies 20 knots and 5 foot seas, 6 foot seas as you head down to the coast. Look for a west and southwesterly flow moving over Kodiak Island and the Pacific coastline there. 15 knots coming out of the west gives us about 5 to 6 foot seas in the area. 8 foot seas east of Kodiak coming up to 9 feet on Sunday. Southwesterlies around 20 knots with a 5 foot sea in Shelikof Strait, and south and westerly winds coming along the Alaska Peninsula coastline, 5 to 6 foot seas there as we wrap up the weekend. Out west, you can see the changes happening quickly as the next weather system moves in. 20 foot sea there on a 30 knot wind, so a lot of chop developing out in the west. We'll see that spreading eastward with time over the weekend. A west and southwesterly flow should be expected for the central and eastern chain. 20 to 25 knots, 5 to 11 foot seas as we work through the eastern end of the island. 7 foot seas north of Adak and Atkin. As we get into Sunday, that fast moving system there with gales and maybe even some storm force winds developing We'll see 10 to 11 foot seas around the Bering, 6 foot seas around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and 16 to almost 20 foot seas on the Pacific coast side there with 40-knot winds at least on Sunday. We'll see if that strengthens as the weather system does look to be a fairly deep one. North and easterly flow coming out of Norton Sound, 35 knots with 7 to 12 foot seas. Light southeasterlies around St. Paul and St. George, northwesterlies in the Kuskokwim Delta region with a 4-foot sea on that 15-knot wind. For Sunday, the winds kind of reverse course a little bit, have a weak area of high pressure setting up behind all of the disturbed weather that's moving out. Northeasterly winds are settling down after a pretty blustery week there. It does look like we'll get back into 20 to 30-knot winds there, the strongest of which are still moving out of the region. Look for about 5 to 7 foot seas in the area. 10 foot seas, though, will continue around St. Matthew. And for the north coast, looking for light winds over the ice, 5 to 10 knots across the central and eastern Beaufort. Northerlies coming into Utqiagvik with a 2-foot sea, and north and easterly winds strengthening a little bit more down the Chukchi coast, anywhere from 15 to 25 knots, and an 8-foot sea outside of Kotzebue Sound becoming 5-foot seas there as we get into Sunday, with northerlies anywhere from 20 knots or so, 15 knots around Utqiagvik to Point Lay. But notice this is more of an offshore flow around Utqiagvik and Point Barrow, and stronger easterlies are developing around Kaktovik up to 25 knots by Sunday. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Low pressure still sitting at around southwestern Alaska, will sit there for a good chunk of the weekend as well, but it is channeling some snow right around the Dillingham area. We are expecting some light accumulations, about 3 to 5 inches, and a winter weather advisory is posted, which includes some freezing rain around Lake Iliamna and all the way out toward Point Allsworth. Low pressure is also moving through south central. Will keep unsettled weather around and maybe a chance for some light rain around south central, which probably means freezing rain with the temperatures in place. And southeast will see some quick bursts of heavy rain. The good news is that the Ketchikan Dam level is coming down, so no major threat right there. The flood advisory has been dropped for now, but rain will continue where you are, and snow continues around the Alaska Range and points east. Have a great weekend.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.